Have you ever found yourself in a conversation where you just kept talking, explaining, justifying only to realize, too late, that every extra word was chipping away at your credibility? It's a strange paradox. The more we try to make ourselves understood, the less weight our words seem to carry. Think about the last time you over-explained a decision, a mistake, or even a simple opinion. Did it leave you feeling more secure, or did it subtly undermine the very point you were trying to make? This isn't just a social misstep, it's a silent drain on your personal power. And here's the surprising truth. The ancient Stoics saw this coming 2,000 years ago. They understood something profound about human nature that we've forgotten. That silence isn't just the absence of speech. It's a form of strength, a way to reclaim authority in a world drowning in noise. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor who ruled Rome at its height, wrote in his private journals about the discipline of restraint. You don't have to turn this into something, he reminded himself. You don't have to react, you don't have to explain. Imagine that, one of the most powerful men in history, facing unimaginable pressures, deliberately choosing silence over justification. Why? Because he knew that excessive words dilute intent. Every time we over-explain, we hand over a piece of our leverage, as if bargaining for approval. The Stoics called this the unseen cost, the way our need to be understood can quietly erode our standing, our confidence, even our self-respect. But what if you could flip the script? What if, instead of scrambling to justify your actions, you could let your decisions speak for themselves? This isn't about being mysterious or withholding. It's about recognizing that true authority doesn't come from volume, it comes from clarity. The Stoics didn't advocate silence out of secrecy. They practiced it as a form of respect for themselves and others. When you stop over-explaining, something remarkable happens. People lean in. They listen closer. They assign more weight to your words because you've shown them you don't need their validation. That's the hidden power of measured speech. And today, we're going to explore how to reclaim it, how to rebuild your presence, not through more words, but through the deliberate, strategic use of silence. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. There's a hidden assumption behind our urge to over-explain, a quiet, persistent belief that if we just say enough, if we cover every angle, we can somehow control how others perceive us. We layer word upon word, detail upon detail, as if language were a shield against misunderstanding or judgment. But here's the uncomfortable truth Epictetus pointed out centuries ago. We don't control how people interpret us. No amount of explanation can guarantee someone will see things our way. The Stoic philosopher put it bluntly, some things are up to us and some are not. Our words up to us, how they land, not up to us. Every time we over-explain, we're not just wasting energy, we're clinging to an illusion. Think about the last email you sent that ran 3 paragraphs longer than it needed to. Or the meeting where you kept circling back to the same point, afraid someone might miss your intent. What were you really trying to accomplish? Beneath the flood of words, there's often a fear of being dismissed, of seeming uncertain, of not being liked. But here's the irony. The more we try to control perceptions with words, the less control we actually have. Like gripping sand too tightly, the harder we squeeze, the faster it slips away. Epictetus offered a radical alternative. Focus only on what's yours to govern. Your actions, yours, your intentions, yours, the conclusions others draw. Not yours. This isn't about indifference, it's about precision. When you trim away the excess, when you trust your decisions to stand without a chorus of justifications, something shifts. People stop waiting for the caveats, the disclaimers, "but let me explain." They start responding to the clarity of your conviction. So here's a challenge. The next time you feel that familiar pull to over-explain, pause. Ask yourself, am I trying to control the uncontrollable? Then take a breath and let the silence do the work. You might just find that less words, not more, become your greatest source of influence. The need to explain ourselves often comes from a deeper hunger, the craving for others to validate our choices, to confirm we're on the right path. But the Stoics saw this as a dangerous trap. Seneca, the great Roman thinker, wrote, "What does it matter how much you have? What does it matter how people react? None of it defines you." He wasn't just dismissing opinions, he was exposing a fundamental truth. When we hinge our worth on external approval, we hand over our power. Every extra justification, every added detail becomes a quiet plea. Do you see me? Do you accept me? And in that moment, we trade something precious, our self-sufficiency, for the fleeting comfort of being understood. Consider how often we dress up our decisions with unnecessary reasons, especially when we sense disapproval. A simple no becomes a 3-minute monologue about scheduling conflicts or prior commitments. Why? Because we're afraid the other person will think less of us. But here's what Seneca understood. No amount of explanation can force someone to see you the way you want. Their judgment is theirs alone. It's not a mirror reflecting your true value. The more you try to control it, the more you tie your confidence to something utterly beyond your control. This is where silence becomes revolutionary. When you resist the urge to over-explain, you're not being rude or evasive. You're drawing a boundary. You're declaring, silently but powerfully, that your choices don't require a jury. Imagine declining an invitation with a polite but firm, "I won't be able to attend," instead of weaving an elaborate excuse. That restraint sends a message. Your time is yours to steward, and your reasons are yours alone. People may not always like it, but they'll respect it, because beneath that quiet, they sense something rare. A person who isn't bargaining for their approval. Rebuilding intrinsic worth starts with this shift, recognizing that your value isn't held in someone else's mind. It's not something they can grant or withhold. The Stoics called this living according to nature, aligning your sense of self with what's truly yours to control. Your character, yours, your efforts. Yours, the rest, noise. When you stop feeding the noise with endless explanations, something remarkable happens. You begin to hear yourself again. You rediscover the quiet certainty that doesn't need to shout to be felt. And that's when you realize the less you say, the more you're heard. Every extra word we speak, every justification we offer, comes at a cost not just to our credibility, but to something far more precious, our mental energy. Think about how drained you feel after a conversation where you've over-explained, over-defended, over-clarified. It's as if you've been hauling buckets of water to fill a pool with a hole in it. No matter how much you pour in, it never feels like enough. Marcus Aurelius, in his private meditations, put it plainly. You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. His urgency wasn't morbid, it was practical. He recognized time and energy as finite resources, and every unnecessary word as a small theft from yourself. This isn't just about efficiency, it's about sovereignty. When we habitually justify, we're not just giving away words, we're surrendering focus, presence, even fragments of our peace. Imagine a sculptor chiseling away at a block of marble. Each strike is deliberate, purposeful. Now imagine that same sculptor hacking randomly at the stone, wasting motion, dulling the tool. That's what overcommunication does to our minds. It blunts our clarity, leaving us exhausted but no closer to understanding. The Stoics saw this clearly. They practiced what they called linguistic economy, the art of saying only what's essential, not because they were cold or withholding, but because they valued their inner reserves too much to spill them carelessly. Consider the last time you stayed silent when you could have explained. Maybe it was biting back the urge to correct someone, or resisting the impulse to justify why you left an event early. Recall how light you felt afterward, as if you'd sidestepped a trap. That lightness isn't an illusion, it's the tangible relief of energy preserved. Silence in these moments isn't passive. It's an active choice to redirect your resources inward toward what truly matters. Here's the paradox: the more we conserve our words, the richer our communication becomes. A single sentence, spoken with intention after measured silence, carries more weight than a dozen rushed explanations. Marcus Aurelius didn't fill his journals with rambling self-justification. He distilled his thoughts into razor-sharp reminders. "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be," he wrote. Be one, that's the power of economy, cutting away the excess to reveal what's sturdy and true. So next time you feel the pull to over-explain, pause. Ask yourself, is this word necessary? Is this explanation serving me or depleting me? Then choose not just your words, but where your energy flows, because every moment you don't spend justifying is a moment you can spend living. Silence isn't just the absence of noise, it's a fortress. Think of it this way: every unnecessary word you don't say is a brick in the wall between what's yours to protect and what's not. The Stoics didn't just preach this, they lived it. Epictetus, the former slave-turned-philosopher, put it bluntly: what upsets people is not things themselves, but their judgments about things. And here's the key: those judgments, they don't belong to you. When you stop explaining, you're not being evasive. You're drawing a line in the sand, marking what's yours to govern and what's beyond your control. Picture this: a colleague asks why you're leaving work on time for once, and you feel that familiar itch to justify. Your kid's recital, a doctor's appointment, as if your time needs permission to be yours. Now imagine instead a simple, unapologetic, because it's what works for me. No defense, no elaboration. That silence isn't empty, it's fortified. It tells the world, this boundary isn't up for debate. The Stoics called this tacitinitas, the discipline of holding silence where words would only weaken your position. History's most formidable leaders understood this instinctively. When Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon, he didn't call a Senate meeting to explain his reasoning. He acted, then let the act speak for itself. Why? Because justification is bargaining, and bargaining implies someone else holds veto power over your choices. Silence, in contrast, is sovereignty in motion. But here's where modern life trips us up. We confuse boundaries with rudeness. We've been conditioned to believe that unless we soften our no with a dozen reasons, we're being harsh. Yet the Stoics would argue the opposite, that over-explaining is the real disrespect, both to yourself and the other person. It assumes they can't handle a simple boundary without a backstory. Try this experiment. Next time someone presses for details you don't owe them, offer a polite but unadorned refusal. Watch how the dynamic shifts, their surprise. Proof of how rare it's become to let a no stand on its own. Epictetus offered a litmus test. If someone tried to take control of your body, you'd fight back. Why then do you hand over your mind? Every time you over-explain, you're handing over mental real estate, space that should be yours alone. The power of unspoken boundaries isn't in their harshness, but in their clarity. Like a well-built fence, they don't shout to keep others out. They simply mark where the wild ends and the cultivated begins. Your silence, then, isn't a lack, it's the quietest form of self-respect. There's an ancient symmetry to communication that the Stoics understood better than most. For every word spoken, there should be two ears listening. Zeno of Citium, the founder of Stoicism, put it plainly: we have two ears and one mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak. This wasn't just clever wordplay, it was a radical redefinition of power. In a world where over-talking has become the default, where silence is often mistaken for weakness, the Stoics flipped the script. True strength lies not in dominating the conversation, but in mastering the art of hearing what isn't being said. Think about the last time someone truly listened to you, not just waited for their turn to talk, but absorbed your words with full attention. Felt different, didn't it? That's because deep listening is a rare form of respect. It says, "What you think matters enough for me to quiet my own mind." The Stoics called this prosoj, the discipline of attention. When you listen like this, you're not just gathering information, you're building bridges. You're uncovering the unspoken fears, hopes, and assumptions that shape how people move through the world. And here's the paradox: the less you rush to fill the silence, the more influence you quietly accrue. Contrast this with how most of us communicate today. We treat conversations like tennis matches, volleying words back and forth, but rarely pausing to notice the other player's stance. We're so busy rehearsing our next point that we miss the subtle cues, the hesitation in their voice, the way their eyes flicker when they mention a certain topic. The Stoics would call this a wasted opportunity. Epictetus taught that every interaction is a chance to practice virtue, and listening, truly listening, is one of the highest forms. Here's the challenge: next time you're in a conversation, resist the urge to respond immediately. Instead, lean into the pause. Let the silence stretch for a beat longer than feels comfortable. Watch what happens. Without your usual barrage of words, the other person will often reveal more than they intended. They'll clarify, expand, or even contradict themselves, giving you a clearer map of their true thoughts. This isn't manipulation, it's the art of creating space for truth to emerge. Zeno knew something we've forgotten. Wisdom isn't just about what you say, it's about what you hear. The marketplace of ideas is noisy, but the most valuable insights often come to those who stop shouting and start listening. So today, practice this Stoic shift. Let your silence be as intentional as your speech. You might just find that the less you say, the more you understand. Ever notice how some conversations seem to spiral out of control, not because of what's said, but because of what's over-explained? That moment when a simple disagreement turns into a battlefield of justifications, each side digging in deeper with every added word. Seneca saw this pattern 2,000 years ago. He warned that most conflicts aren't fueled by genuine differences, but by our compulsion to keep talking long after silence would have resolved them. "We suffer more in imagination than in reality," he wrote, "and nowhere is this truer than in the petty disputes we prolong by refusing to let silence do its work." Think about the last time you witnessed or participated in an argument that grew larger than the issue itself. Maybe it started with a minor misunderstanding, but with every added explanation, every attempt to make them see, the tension tightened. That's the irony. The more we try to clarify, the murkier things become. The Stoics called this adiaphora, indifference, things not worth our energy. Yet we treat them as urgent, pouring words into conflicts that would dissolve if we simply stopped feeding them. Here's the counterintuitive truth: silence isn't passive in these moments, it's a strategic retreat. Like stepping back from a boiling pot, it gives the heat space to dissipate. Consider how differently a workplace disagreement unfolds when one person refuses to engage in the back and forth. No defensiveness, no point-by-point rebuttal, just a calm, measured pause. Suddenly, the other person's words hang in the air without opposition to ricochet off of. Without fuel, the fire sputters. Seneca advised, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." In this context, the best resolution isn't to out-argue, but to refuse the game entirely. This isn't about suppressing your voice or avoiding difficult conversations. It's about recognizing when words cease to serve and start to sabotage. The Stoics drew a line between constructive dialogue and fruitless contention. Marcus Aurelius would ask himself before speaking, is this necessary? Is it kind? Is it true? Three filters that, applied rigorously, would silence most drama before it begins. Try this experiment. Next time someone tries to pull you into a petty conflict, respond with deliberate economy. Not coldness, not avoidance, just a few purposeful words, then space. Watch how often the other person mirrors your restraint. Silence, wielded well, isn't a wall, it's a mirror reflecting back the energy it's given. And in that reflection, people often see their own excess for what it is. Seneca's most practical advice: avoid those who make you feel exhausted. Sometimes that exhausting person is the version of yourself caught in endless explanations. When you stop over-talking, you don't just diffuse conflicts, you sidestep them entirely, because tranquility isn't the absence of chaos around you, it's the presence of quiet within. And that begins with knowing when to let silence speak. We've all been there, wrestling with the gnawing fear that if we don't explain ourselves thoroughly, we'll be misjudged, mislabeled, or worse, dismissed. It's a modern anxiety, this obsession with being perfectly understood. But here's the hard truth the Stoics uncovered centuries ago: the quest for universal understanding is a fool's errand. Marcus Aurelius put it bluntly in his Meditations: "It never ceases to amaze me. We all love ourselves more than other people, but care more about their opinion than our own." Let that sink in. We're terrified of being misunderstood by people whose perspectives we don't even respect. That's the myth at the heart of our over-explaining, the idea that if we just find the right words, we can control how others see us. Consider how often you've replayed conversations in your head, agonizing over how someone might have misinterpreted your tone or your brevity. Now ask yourself, has that mental rehearsal ever actually changed the outcome? The Stoics would say no, not because people are unkind, but because perception is inherently subjective. Two people can witness the same event and walk away with entirely different stories. No amount of explanation can bridge that gap. What if, instead of fighting this reality, you embraced it? What if you treated misunderstandings not as failures to prevent, but as natural occurrences like weather? Sometimes inconvenient but never personal. This isn't about becoming indifferent to connection. It's about redirecting your energy from the uncontrollable to the meaningful. When Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The opinion of 10,000 men is of no value if none of them know anything about the subject," he wasn't advocating arrogance. He was highlighting a simple fact: not all perceptions are worth your attention. The cashier who misreads your tone, the co-worker who twists your silence into aloofness, their interpretations say more about their inner world than your character. Here's the experiment. For one day, practice trusting silence, not as a test of willpower, but as an act of liberation. When someone raises an eyebrow at your short email, resist the urge to follow up with 3 clarifying paragraphs. When a friend questions your life choices, offer a simple, "This feels right to me," and let it stand. Notice what happens. At first, it might feel like walking a tightrope without a net. But soon, you'll discover something unexpected. The world doesn't collapse when you stop over-clarifying. In fact, something far more interesting happens. You start to discern whose opinions truly matter. The noise fades, and the few voices worth hearing become crystal clear. The Stoics called this apatheia, not apathy, but freedom from the tyranny of external validation. It's the quiet confidence that comes when you stop treating every interaction like a courtroom where you're perpetually on trial. Try it. The next time you feel that familiar panic, "They'll think I'm rude/uncaring/arrogant. Pause. Breathe and ask yourself, Is this fear serving me, or is it serving someone else's expectation? Then choose silence not as a shield, but as a declaration. Some misunderstandings aren't problems to solve, they're boundaries waiting to be honored. Imagine your words as coins, each one carrying value, each one spent carefully. The Stoics understood this economy of speech better than anyone. Epictetus, who lived his early years in chains, learned early that unnecessary words are like chains of a different kind. They weigh you down without moving you forward. First learn the meaning of what you say, he warned, and then speak. It's a radical idea in a world where we're taught that more words equal more authority. But here's the truth: precision isn't just about efficiency, it's about power. Every extra detail, every tangent we tack onto our explanations dilutes the potency of what really matters. Think about the last time someone asked for directions. You could describe every landmark, every potential detour, or you could simply say, "Turn left at the blue sign." One approach overwhelms, the other empowers. The Stoics weren't advocating for curtness, they were championing clarity. When Epictetus taught his students, he didn't bury his lessons in layers of abstraction. He cut straight to the core. If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish. Notice what he didn't say. No caveats, no exceptions, just 15 words that could reshape a life. This discipline extends far beyond philosophy. Consider how often we pad our speech with qualifiers. "I'm not sure, but," or "this might sound crazy." These aren't just words, they're self-inflicted wounds to your credibility. Like a sculptor chipping away excess marble to reveal the statue within, trimming verbal clutter reveals the strength of your convictions. The ancient Greeks called this parrhesia, fearless speech. Not reckless, not harsh, but unburdened by the weight of unnecessary justification. Here's the challenge: for the next 24 hours, treat your words like a limited currency. Before speaking, ask Epictetus's question: is this necessary? Not "could this be helpful?" or "might this impress?" Just necessary. You'll start to notice something extraordinary. The more you prune away the excess, the more room your real meaning has to grow. Silence isn't empty space between words. It's the fertile ground where understanding takes root. There's a reason the shortest letters from history's greatest minds endure. Marcus Aurelius's journals weren't rambling diaries, they were razor-sharp reminders. Seneca's letters to Lucilius didn't meander, they pierced. These men wielded silence as intentionally as speech, knowing that what's unspoken often speaks loudest. Your words are finite, spend them where they matter. Let the rest fall away, not as loss but as liberation. There's a quiet magnetism to people who speak less but say more, a gravitational pull we can't quite explain. Seneca, the Stoic philosopher who advised emperors, mastered this art. His letters to Lucilius weren't bloated with platitudes, they were surgical in their precision. "A wise man speaks because he has something to say," he wrote. "A fool because he has to say something." Notice the distinction. It's not just about word count, but about the weight behind each syllable. When Seneca described anger, grief, or ambition, he didn't meander through endless analogies. He struck like a blacksmith, one clean hit to shape the metal. That's the essence of Stoic communication. Self-assurance distilled into language so lean it almost hums with energy. Watch any truly confident leader, not the blustery types who dominate airtime, but those who move through rooms with quiet authority. Their sentences are shorter, their pauses longer. They don't rush to fill silence because they're not afraid of what it might reveal. Think of the CEO who answers a hostile question with a single, unadorned "no," then waits. Or the teacher who quiets a rowdy classroom not by raising her voice but by lowering it. These aren't tricks, they're manifestations of an inner calculus, the understanding that words are currency, and spending them recklessly devalues your message. Seneca's genius was recognizing that verbosity often masks uncertainty. The more we hedge, the more we say, sort of, or I guess, the more we invite doubt both in others and in ourselves. His cure was brutal simplicity. When advising Lucilius on time management, he didn't lecture, he sliced to the core. You act like mortals in all that you fear, and like immortals in all that you desire. 12 words that collapse a lifetime of procrastination into stark relief. That's the power of economy. It doesn't just convey ideas, it etches them. Here's the experiment. For the next 24 hours, audit your speech like a Stoic accountant. Every time you're tempted to add a filler phrase, to be honest, just my opinion, maybe this is silly, pause. Ask, does this strengthen my point or dilute it? You'll start noticing something peculiar. The less you say, the more space your confidence has to expand. Like a sculptor removing excess stone to reveal the figure within, cutting verbal clutter uncovers the authority you've been carrying all along. Because true assurance doesn't come from having endless explanations at the ready. It comes from knowing some truths don't need decoration, they just need to be spoken, clean and clear, then left to do their work. Every time you catch yourself saying, I had to because. Or, the reason I chose this was, you're not just sharing context, you're subtly handing over the reins of your autonomy. Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher who turned adversity into wisdom, saw this pattern clearly. He taught that justification is the language of the enslaved, not because it's weak, but because it assumes someone else holds authority over your choices. If you want to improve, he said, be content to be thought foolish. That's the heart of it. The moment you prioritize others' understanding over your own conviction, you've traded sovereignty for approval. Picture this, you're at a dinner party and someone questions why you're not drinking. The old script kicks in a laundry list of reasons about health, productivity, personal goals. But what if instead you simply smiled and said, it's what works for me, no defense, no debate. That shift from explanation to declaration isn't just about alcohol, it's a reclaiming of agency. The Stoics called this autarkeia, self-governance. When you stop justifying, you're not being rude, you're drawing an invisible line around your decisions, marking them as yours alone to make. Here's the paradox, the more reasons we give, the weaker our position becomes. Think of a tree explaining its roots to the wind. It doesn't, it stands. And in that standing, it teaches the wind where the boundary lies. Justifications, by contrast, are like uprooting yourself to show skeptics your foundation, as if their validation could somehow make your ground more solid. Epictetus, born into slavery, knew this better than anyone. His freedom wasn't won through explanations, it was claimed through unwavering ownership of his inner world. You are the one who knows yourself, he reminded his students. What others think is their business. Try this experiment for one day. Treat your decisions like facts of nature, unapologetic and self-evident. When someone asks why you're leaving early, why you declined the project, why you voted a certain way, offer the simplest version of the truth without embellishment. Notice the tension in your chest, that itch to elaborate, that discomfort. It's the feeling of autonomy fighting its way to the surface. Because every time you resist the urge to justify, you're not just protecting your time or choices, you're reinforcing a far deeper truth. Your life doesn't require a footnote. The Stoics didn't advocate stubbornness or disregard for others. They practiced discernment, knowing when an explanation served connection and when it merely fed others' entitlement to your inner world. Next time you feel compelled to justify, pause. Ask Epictetus's question, who benefits from these words? If the answer isn't you, let silence hold the space instead. Some choices aren't meant to be understood, they're meant to be lived. criticism has a way of pulling words out of us, as if every accusation demands an answer, every sideways glance requires clarification. But what if the most powerful response isn't a rebuttal at all? Marcus Aurelius faced this daily as emperor, surrounded by senators who questioned his decisions and citizens who misunderstood his motives. His solution, a line from his journals that cuts to the bone. You don't have to have an opinion about this. Think about that for a moment. The most powerful man in Rome gave himself permission not to engage, not to defend, not to internalize. He understood something profound, that criticism only gains weight when we lift it. Picture two artists. One stops painting to argue with every passerby who critiques their brushstrokes. The other keeps working undisturbed. Over time, whose craft improves, whose vision remains intact. This is the Stoic secret to handling criticism, not through confrontation, but through selective silence. When someone questions your choices, your abilities, even your character, you're facing a test far deeper than the content of their words. The real test is whether you'll let their judgment become your distraction. History offers striking examples. When the Stoic philosopher Cato was mocked in public for his outdated clothing, he didn't justify his style or fire back with insults. He stood so completely unmoved that his silence became legendary. The crowd didn't just stop laughing, they started questioning their own pettiness. That's the alchemy of unresponsive calm. It doesn't just deflect attacks, it exposes their emptiness. But here's where we stumble. We confuse silence with surrender. We fear that if we don't correct the record, the criticism will stick. Yet Marcus Aurelius observed the opposite. The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. When you refuse to match someone's hostility with your own words, you reveal their outburst for what it often is: noise seeking an echo. Try this reframe. Next time criticism comes, pause. Ask yourself not, how do I defend, but does this require my energy? Most won't. The co-worker's snide remark about your presentation, the relative's unsolicited parenting advice. These aren't dialogues, they're monologues dressed as engagement. Your silence isn't passive, it's a filter, separating what deserves your attention from what deserves your indifference. Marcus Aurelius left us a compass. The opinion of 10,000 men is of no value if none of them know anything about the subject. Some criticisms are like weather vanes constantly spinning, pointing nowhere. Your power lies not in correcting their direction, but in building something solid enough to withstand all winds. There's a reason the world's most decisive leaders often share one habit: they don't rush to fill the quiet. Seneca, the Stoic philosopher who navigated the treacherous courts of Nero, left us a simple but radical prescription. Delay is the greatest remedy for anger. But this wisdom extends far beyond temper. It's a blueprint for clear decision-making. He wasn't just advising patience, he was revealing how silence functions as a mental crucible, burning away impulsive reactions to reveal refined judgment. Picture a judge refusing to deliver a verdict until the courtroom falls completely still. That's not hesitation, it's the deliberate creation of space for truth to emerge. Modern neuroscience confirms what the Stoics observed millennia ago. When faced with choices, our brains cycle through two distinct systems: the fast, emotional response and the slower, analytical one. The gap between them, that's where silence works its magic. Seneca called it intervallum, a strategic pause where reason catches up to instinct. Think of the last snap decision you regretted. Now imagine inserting just 30 seconds of pure silence between stimulus and response. How many missteps could that space have prevented? The Stoics didn't see silence as passive. They weaponized it as a filter, separating raw impulse from intentional action. Consider how most of us make decisions today amid a barrage of notifications, opinions, and self-imposed urgency. We mistake speed for competence, confusing quick replies with wisdom. Contrast this with Marcus Aurelius, who began each morning in deliberate stillness, preparing his mind to face imperial decisions that would ripple across continents. His journal entries weren't rushed, they were excavated from quiet. You have power over your mind, he reminded himself, not outside events. That power flourishes in the absence of noise. Here's the practice. Before any meaningful choice, whether replying to a provoking email or choosing a career path, impose a ritual of silence. Not meditation in the formal sense, but something far simpler. Close your laptop, step away from your phone for 2 full minutes, let the question hang in the air without chasing answers. Notice how your first reaction, often fear-based or people-pleasing, starts to lose its grip. What remains? That's your Stoic wisdom speaking. Seneca's most practical advice was this: wait before reacting, and you'll find most things don't require your reaction at all. Silence isn't just the absence of speech, it's the presence of perspective. The next time you're tempted to respond immediately, remember the most powerful decisions aren't made in the heat of the moment. They're forged in the quiet moments we deliberately create, where clarity isn't drowned out by the noise of our own urgency. Scroll through any social media feed today, and you'll witness a modern phenomenon the Stoics could never have imagined: the compulsive need to narrate every thought, defend every choice, and document every emotion in real time. It's as if we've collectively decided that unless an experience is framed, filtered, and explained to an audience, it doesn't quite count. But here's what Epictetus, the Stoic teacher who valued inner integrity above all, would ask: why unpack your soul to strangers? He warned his students to guard their private judgments like sacred trusts, not because secrecy was virtuous, but because indiscriminate sharing erodes self-possession. Every tweet that begins "okay, hear me out," and every Instagram caption that over-justifies a simple life choice isn't just communication, it's a tiny surrender of sovereignty. Think about the last time you posted something online and felt that gnawing anxiety until the likes rolled in. That discomfort isn't random, it's the price of outsourcing your self-worth to the court of public opinion. The Stoics called this vigilance over what enters and exits your mind. In an age where we broadcast our half-formed thoughts before they've even crystallized, this discipline isn't just neglected, it's inverted. We've been conditioned to believe that transparency equals authenticity, but Epictetus would argue the opposite. True authenticity begins with the wisdom to know what doesn't need to be said. Consider the difference between 2 types of posts you might encounter. One dissects a personal setback in exhaustive detail, fishing for validation through vulnerability. The other shares a simple observation without apology or ornament, which carries more weight. The latter mirrors the Stoic principle of laconic brevity, the Spartan art of saying much with little. When you resist the urge to over-clarify, you're not hiding, you're honoring the boundary between what's yours to process and what's yours to perform. Here's the experiment. For the next week, treat your social media activity like a Stoic exercise. Before posting, ask Epictetus's question: who benefits from these words? If the answer is primarily your ego, the part of you that craves applause or fears being misunderstood, pause. Then ask a second question: would I still do this if no one could see it? That's your litmus test. The goal isn't to vanish online, but to interact with intention. Share what serves, not what soothes. The irony is this: the less you explain yourself digitally, the more substance your presence acquires. Like a museum that rotates its exhibits sparingly, your selective visibility creates anticipation and respect. Meanwhile, the oversharer becomes background noise, a constant hum that people learn to tune out. Epictetus didn't advocate silence to deprive the world of your thoughts. He prescribed it to protect your thoughts from the world, because when you stop feeding the algorithm with your uncertainties, you starve the beast that thrives on them. And in that space, the quiet between posts, you might just rediscover something rare, your unedited self. History remembers Cotto the Younger not for grand speeches, but for the weight of his silence. In the chaos of Rome's Senate, where politicians competed to outshout each other, Cotto would often rise, then say nothing, just stand there, letting the room's tension thicken until his eventual words landed like stones in still water. This wasn't theater, it was tactical restraint. While others diluted their influence with endless rhetoric, Cotto understood that strategic silence commands attention far more than volume ever could. The lesson, true leadership isn't about filling space, it's about creating it. Modern leadership culture often mistakes verbosity for vision. We reward the quickest talkers, the loudest voices, the executives who can spin elaborate justifications on demand. But contrast that with the Stoic model of authority, one embodied by leaders like Marcus Aurelius, who wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good leader should be." B1. Notice the emphasis on action over explanation. When a CEO calmly states, "This is the direction," without tacking on 5 bullet points to appease skeptics, they're not being dismissive. They're practicing what the Stoics called gravitas, the unshakable seriousness that comes from trusting your judgment enough to let it stand alone. Consider how Cotto handled Pompey's attempt to seize power. While others scrambled to voice their objections, Cotto simply refused to rise when Pompey entered the room. No speech, no dramatic confrontation, just a silent refusal to participate in the charade. That single act of wordless defiance carried more force than 100 fiery speeches. Why? Because silence, when wielded with intention, isn't passive. It's a deliberate withholding of approval, of engagement, of the very oxygen theatrics need to survive. Leaders who master this don't just communicate, they curate. Here's the challenge for aspiring leaders. Next time you're tempted to over-explain a decision, pause. Ask yourself whether you're clarifying or compensating. Then try Cotto's approach. State your position clearly, then let the silence hold. Watch how people lean forward to fill it. Some will argue, sure, but others will surprise you by persuading themselves, simply because you gave them room to think rather than react. That's the paradox of Stoic leadership. The less you say to convince, the more others hear. The Roman Senate's most respected figures shared this trait. They understood that influence grows in the gaps between words. When Cincinnatus was called from his farm to save Rome, he didn't hold press conferences about his strategy. He acted, then returned to his plow. That quiet competence built a legacy that outlasted empires. Today's leaders face different battles, but the principle remains. Authority isn't taken through sheer volume. It's earned through the disciplined use of silence, the kind that makes every spoken word worth its weight. There's a peculiar kind of exhaustion that comes from needing to have the final say, that compulsion to keep arguing until the other person concedes, or worse, until you've talked yourself into circles. Marcus Aurelius saw this trap clearly. "How much more grievous are the consequences of anger," he wrote, "than the causes of it." Think about that. The energy we pour into winning debates, into forcing others to see our point, often costs us far more than the original disagreement ever could. The Stoics didn't just advise against this, they saw it as a form of self-sabotage, because when you're locked in battle over who gets the last word, you're no longer arguing about the idea, you're fighting for dominance. And that's a game where no one truly wins. Consider the last time you found yourself in one of those endless, looping debates, maybe about politics or parenting styles, or something as trivial as the best way to load a dishwasher. Recall how the tension built with each volley, how your pulse quickened, how the stakes somehow felt higher even when the topic didn't matter. Now imagine walking away mid-debate. Not in defeat, not in anger, but with the quiet confidence of someone who's decided their peace is worth more than proving a point. That's Stoic detachment in action, recognizing that some battles aren't just unwinnable, they're not worth the toll they take on your equilibrium. Marcus Aurelius faced this daily as emperor. Senators vied for his endorsement, factions demanded his allegiance, and every decision sparked someone's disapproval. His solution, a discipline of disengagement, the best revenge, he reminded himself, is to not be like your enemy. In other words, refuse to mirror their intensity. When you withdraw from the need to prevail, you expose the emptiness of the conflict itself. Like stepping back from a painting, you reveal the bigger picture, that most arguments aren't about truth but about ego. Here's the practice. Next time you're tempted to prolong a debate, pause. Ask yourself not, can I win, but what will winning cost? Then try an experiment. Let the other person have the last word. Not as surrender, but as liberation. Watch what happens. Without your resistance, their momentum falters. Without your engagement, the conflict loses its fuel. This isn't about avoiding difficult conversations. It's about distinguishing between dialogue and duel. The Stoics knew that true freedom isn't found in silencing others, but in silencing the part of yourself that needs to. There's an old saying, when you wrestle with a pig, you both get dirty, but the pig enjoys it. The Stoic version might be, when you wrestle with futility, only one of you walks away tired. Letting go of the last word isn't weakness, it's the ultimate power move, because when you stop needing to convince, you reclaim something priceless, the ability to think clearly, act deliberately, and conserve your energy for what truly matters. And that's a victory no argument can match. There's a profound generosity in knowing when to hold your tongue, an act of respect so counterintuitive that most of us miss it entirely. Seneca, the Stoic philosopher who counseled emperors, saw this clearly. We should give to others the attentive ear we'd like to receive, he wrote, not as a platitude, but as a social discipline. Think about the last time someone truly listened to you, not just waited for their turn to speak, but absorbed your words with full presence. That rare attention didn't just make you feel heard, it made you feel valued. That's the hidden alchemy of silence. When wielded with intention, it doesn't withhold, it honors. Consider how often we interrupt not out of malice but enthusiasm. A friend shares a struggle, and we leap in with solutions before they've finished breathing the problem into the air. A colleague voices an idea, and we're already reshaping it with our own tweaks. These aren't crimes of ego, they're missed opportunities to practice what the Stoics called humanitas, the recognition of another's dignity through restraint. Silence in these moments becomes the space where others can unfold. Like holding a door open rather than rushing through, it's a small act that signals larger respect. Seneca's letters reveal a man deeply attuned to this principle. When advising his friend Lucilius, he didn't bombard him with maxims. He posed questions, then let the silence between lines do the heavy lifting. People learn while they teach, he observed, highlighting how listening, even to those we mentor, can be its own form of guidance. Modern psychology confirms this. When therapists practice reflective silence, clients often arrive at insights no prompt could have elicited. The Stoics understood this millennia ago, that sometimes the greatest gift you can offer isn't your wisdom, but the room for others to discover their own. Try this experiment. In your next conversation, measure your silence as carefully as your speech. When someone pauses, resist the urge to jump in. Count 3 heartbeats after they seem finished. You'll notice something fascinating. People often share their most vulnerable thoughts in those extended breaths, as if your quiet has signaled safety. Relationships deepen not when we fill every gap, but when we trust the gaps enough to leave them open. The Stoic approach to silence wasn't about suppression, it was about elevation. By choosing not to dominate conversations, we acknowledge others as equals in the exchange. There's a quiet power in this, the kind that doesn't demand recognition but earns it. Because when you stop competing for airtime, you create an atmosphere where truth can breathe. And in that space, something remarkable happens. People don't just hear you better, they remember why they wanted to listen in the first place. Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher who turned adversity into wisdom, once posed a challenge to his students. If someone handed your body to any passerby, you'd be furious. Why then do you hand over your mind? That question cuts to the heart of our modern struggle, the reflexive way we surrender our emotional equilibrium to every provocation. Imagine standing at the edge of a cliff, watching your thoughts like stones at your feet. Most of us would never hurl those stones carelessly into the void. Yet we routinely cast our reactions into conversations without a second thought, only to spend days regretting the ripples they create. The Stoic pause isn't about suppression, it's about reclaiming ownership of what leaves your lips. Consider the last time words tumbled out in anger or defensiveness. Recall the heat in your chest, the tightening in your throat, those physical signals Epictetus called impressions. The untrained mind treats these sensations as commands. You're angry, react, but the Stoic discipline interrupts that circuitry. It inserts a moment of stillness between feeling and action, like a swordsman pausing to lower his weapon rather than striking blindly. Marcus Aurelius described this space as the gap, that critical breath where reason regains its footing. Modern neuroscience confirms its power. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for judgment, takes milliseconds longer to engage than the amygdala's emotional flare. Those milliseconds are where mastery lives. Here's how the Stoics trained this muscle. When insulted, Epictetus advised students to respond as if the words were shouted in a foreign language, curious, but meaningless until translated by choice. He wasn't advocating detachment from reality. He was teaching emotional alchemy. By delaying interpretation, you transform reactions into responses. Picture a colleague's sharp email arriving in your inbox. The untrained mind drafts 3 scathing replies before reason intervenes. The Stoic practitioner, they close the laptop, take a walk, let the impression cool like molten metal before deciding whether to shape it into speech. This discipline reveals a profound truth. What we call knee-jerk reactions are often just well-worn habits of surrender. Every time you resist the urge to immediately counter a criticism or correct a misunderstanding, you're not just avoiding conflict, you're rewiring your relationship with control. Seneca compared it to steering a chariot. The skilled driver knows that constant tugging on the reins exhausts both horse and rider. Sometimes the most powerful move is to hold still. Try this reframe. For one day, treat your first emotional impulse like a draft email saved but never sent. When provoked, mentally file the reaction under review rather than respond. Notice how the urgency fades. What remains isn't indifference but clarity. Epictetus promised his students, no one can harm you unless you permit it. Modern life translates that harm into wasted energy on unnecessary battles, strained relationships from words better left unsaid, the slow erosion of peace from reactions that never served you. The pause isn't passive, it's the ultimate act of self-defense, because when you stop handing your mind to every passing provocation, you discover something startling. Most of what demands your reaction doesn't deserve it. Marcus Aurelius once wrote in his private journals, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." That line holds a key modern psychology is only beginning to grasp. Silence isn't just the absence of noise, it's the birthplace of clarity. Picture your mind as a snow globe after a child's furious shaking. Every explanation you compulsively add, every justification you layer on, is another shake keeping the flakes in chaotic motion. The Stoics discovered what happens when you let the globe rest. The sediment settles and suddenly you can see through the glass. This is why Marcus devoted his mornings to what he called the discipline of ascent, those precious moments before dawn where he examined his thoughts without dressing them in words. No elaborate self-justifications, no mental arguments rehearsed for others' benefit, just raw observation, like a scientist noting data before forming hypotheses. Modern research validates this ancient practice. fMRI scans show that silent reflection activates the brain's default mode network, weaving scattered thoughts into coherent patterns. The irony, we're drowning in a culture that treats thinking aloud as virtue, mistaking verbal diarrhea for transparency. Try this Stoic journaling experiment tonight. Write for 10 minutes with one rule: no explanations allowed. Not "I felt angry because," just "anger arose," not "my boss was unfair when." Simply, judgment flared. At first, it'll feel like mental nakedness, vulnerable and strange. But gradually, you'll notice something extraordinary: the space between your experiences and your stories about them. That space is where Stoic wisdom lives. When Epictetus said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you interpret it," he was pointing to this exact gap. Contemporary psychology calls this metacognition, thinking about thinking. The Stoics called it prosoch, vigilant self-awareness. Both recognize the same truth: we don't see reality, we see our narrations of reality. And every time we rush to justify, we cement those narrations as truth. Marcus's morning ritual wasn't about suppressing thoughts. It was about observing them with what he termed dry light, uncolored by emotional spin. Here's where modern life betrays us. We've built entire industries around outsourcing this inner stillness: podcasts filling our commutes, playlists drowning out our showers, screens avoiding elevator silence. We've pathologized being alone with unedited thoughts, calling it boredom or worse. Yet the Stoics would argue this avoidance is the real disorder. When Seneca advised his friend Lucilius to take time for stillness, he wasn't prescribing meditation in the modern sense. He was insisting on regular confrontation with the unfiltered self. What you believe when no one's listening, what you fear when no one's reassuring you. The practice is simpler than you'd think. Next time you reach for your phone in a waiting room, pause. Let the mental itch for distraction rise and pass like a wave. Notice how thoughts you've been avoiding float to the surface: unfinished conversations, neglected decisions, half-formed regrets. This isn't discomfort to flee, it's clarity in its raw state. Marcus described these moments as seeing things as they are, stripped of the mythologies we wrap them in. Journaling without justification is the gymnasium for this skill. When you record an event without editorializing, "she ignored me" becomes "she walked past." You're not being naive, you're practicing radical objectivity. The Stoics knew what cognitive scientists now confirm: the stories we tell about events often hurt more than the events themselves. By silencing the commentary, you starve unnecessary suffering of oxygen. This isn't passive acceptance, it's strategic detachment, like a general surveying a battlefield from a hilltop rather than being mired in the clash of swords below. Silence grants altitude. From there, you'll start spotting patterns invisible at ground level: how often your explanations are actually excuses, how frequently your justifications are attempts to control others' perceptions. That altitude becomes power: the power to respond rather than react, to choose rather than compulsively explain. Marcus left us the ultimate clue in his Meditations. The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. Silence is the rinse cycle, the deliberate return to neutral before life's next dye job. Try it tonight. Put pen to paper without the crutch of because. You might just meet a version of yourself you've been explaining away for years. There's an unexpected alchemy to communication. The quieter you become, the louder your message resonates. Seneca captured this paradox perfectly. Speech is the mirror of the soul. As a man speaks, so he is. But here's what most miss: he didn't say, as a man speaks often. The Stoics recognized that words gain potency through scarcity, like sunlight breaking through clouds only to illuminate more vividly. Think of the last time someone answered your frantic question with a single, deliberate sentence. That pause before they spoke, that economy of language, it didn't diminish their point, it concentrated it. History's most influential communicators understood this. When the Spartan king Leonidas was threatened with Persia's arrows darkening the sky, his legendary reply wasn't a speech, it was 4 words: "Then we'll fight in the shade." No justification, no dramatics, just unadorned resolve that echoed through millennia. The Stoics called this brachology, the art of conveying maximum meaning with minimum words. It's not about being terse, it's about removing everything that dilutes your intent. Like a sculptor chiseling away excess stone to reveal the form within, strategic silence reveals the core of your message. Modern research confirms this ancient insight. Studies on courtroom persuasiveness show jurors assign more credibility to witnesses who pause before answering, not because they're uncertain, but because the silence signals deliberation. The same principle applies when you resist the urge to fill every conversational gap. That breath you take before responding, it's not dead air, it's the space where your listener's brain leans in. Seneca observed, the more you say, the less people remember. He wasn't advocating muteness, he was highlighting a universal truth: impact isn't measured in word count, but in weight. Try this experiment for one conversation today. Have your usual word output, not by speaking less, but by trimming every sentence to its essence. Notice how your listener's posture shifts, their slight forward lean, their longer eye contact. That's the paradox at work. When you stop explaining, people start receiving. It's why Steve Jobs' famous product launches didn't drone through feature lists. They let silence underscore key revelations. The unspoken rule of persuasion: the fewer words you spend, the more attention you earn. The Stoics took this further with aposiopesis, the deliberate breaking off of speech to let implications resonate. Picture a general addressing troops before battle, ending not with a rousing finale, but with a sudden, charged quiet. That silence isn't empty, it's a vessel for the audience to fill with their own conviction. You can harness this today. Next time you're making a point, try stopping just short of over-clarifying. Let your conclusion hang in the air like the lingering note of a bell. The human mind hates unresolved tension. It will instinctively rush to complete the thought, ensuring your idea lands deeper than any lecture could. Seneca's letters reveal a master of this craft. When advising his friend Lucilius on overcoming adversity, he didn't drown him in platitudes. He wrote, "Fortune falls heavily on those unprepared. Prepare." 7 words that punch harder than 7 paragraphs. Notice the architecture, the setup, the pause implied by that M-dash, then the staccato resolution. That's not happenstance, it's rhetorical engineering. The silence between clauses forces the reader to bridge the gap, weaving Seneca's wisdom into their own understanding. Here's where modern communication fails us. We mistake frequency for presence, flooding conversations with verbal placeholders, "you know," "I mean," like as if silence were a vacuum to be feared. The Stoics knew better. Their practice of premeditatio malorum, imagining worst-case scenarios included rehearsing not just what to say, but when not to. They understood that true eloquence isn't about having the last word. It's about knowing when your last word should have been 3 sentences ago. The challenge is simple but radical. Start treating silence as punctuation, not absence. Let your periods be full stops, not ellipses begging for continuation. When you share an idea, resist the postscript impulse that, and another thing, urge that dilutes your initial thrust. Watch how your words gain gravity when they're not weighed down by excess, because in the economy of attention, the richest communicators aren't those with the most currency. They're the ones who spend it wisest. Awkward silences have become modern kryptonite. We'll say anything to avoid them, even if it means rambling nonsense just to fill the void. But the Stoics saw these pauses differently. Epictetus, who endured slavery before becoming philosophy's most grounded teacher, offered a radical reframe. If silence is uncomfortable, it's not the silence that's the problem, it's your interpretation of it. That's the key. We don't fear the quiet, we fear what we assume it means. That someone's bored, that we've failed, that connection is slipping away. But what if those gaps aren't failures at all? What if they're the very spaces where real understanding grows? Picture 2 people locked in rapid-fire dialogue, each sentence bouncing off the last like a tennis match. Now imagine that same conversation with occasional pauses, not empty but fertile. Those moments where neither speaks are when the mind absorbs, when reflections form, when the subconscious works. The Stoics called these intervals eutrapelia, the natural rhythm of meaningful exchange. Think of how musicians understand rests aren't just absences of sound, they're what give music shape. Epictetus trained his students to sit comfortably in conversational lulls, not as victims of dead air, but as conductors allowing the symphony to breathe. Modern neuroscience backs this ancient insight. Studies on turn taking in conversation reveal that the average gap between speakers is barely 0.2 of a second shorter than an eye blink. Yet when researchers artificially extended these pauses to just 1 second, something remarkable happened. Responses became more thoughtful, empathy increased, and participants reported feeling more connected. That's the paradox. By rushing to fill silence, we sabotage the depth we crave. The Stoics knew this instinctively. Their dialogues weren't debates, they were mutual excavations, with silence as the tool that uncovered deeper layers. Here's the practice. Next time you feel that itch to jump in when the pause stretches just a beat too long, lean into it. Let your discomfort rise and pass like a wave. Notice how the other person often reveals something unexpected when given room. Maybe they clarify their previous point. Maybe they ask a better question. Or maybe they simply mirror your calm, creating a new rhythm together. This isn't passive, it's participatory silence, like 2 dancers occasionally stepping back to appreciate the movement. Epictetus had a blunt term for our fear of quiet, prolalia, unnecessary speech born of anxiety. He saw it as a form of self-betrayal, trading presence for performance. Contrast this with Marcus Aurelius, who wrote his deepest insights not in speeches, but in the private stillness of his journals. Both understood that words gain meaning from the silence around them. A master carpenter doesn't resent the space between joints. They know it's what holds the structure together. Try this reframe. Start viewing conversational pauses as diagnostic tools. The discomfort you feel, that's your reliance on external validation showing itself. The urge to fill the void, that's your mind revealing its addiction to constant stimulation. Each time you resist, you're not just enduring silence, you're retraining your ability to think independently of others' reactions. The Stoics didn't champion quiet for its own sake. They revered it as the gymnasium where self-possession is built. So tomorrow, when the conversation lulls, don't panic. Don't reflexively mention the weather or repeat a point you've already made. Hold the space. Watch how the dynamic shifts when you're not scrambling to entertain. You might just discover what Epictetus promised his students, that the richest connections often begin where words end. Marcus Aurelius scribbled a reminder in his private journal that cuts through 20 centuries of noise. Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. That single line captures the Stoic obsession with integrity, not as something to describe, but as something to embody. There's a profound difference between explaining your values and enacting them, between listing principles and living them. The emperor wasn't dismissing dialogue. He was exposing a trap we all fall into, mistaking the map for the territory, the menu for the meal. When your actions align with your philosophy so completely that words become redundant, you've achieved what the Stoics called arete excellence of character that shines without announcement. Consider two co-workers approaching the same problem. One delivers a passionate speech about accountability before taking action. The other simply fixes the issue, then moves on. Both achieve the same result, but which carries more weight? The Stoics would argue the latter, not because humility is virtuous, but because deeds untethered from self-congratulation resonate at a different frequency. Like a tree that doesn't announce its growth but simply stretches toward the sun, unadorned action has a quiet magnetism. Epictetus, who saw firsthand how easily words can mask hypocrisy, put it bluntly: "Don't tell me your principles. Show me what you've built, and I'll tell you what you believe." History offers striking examples. When George Washington resigned his military commission after the Revolutionary War, an act so unexpected it stunned the British monarchy, he didn't preface it with a treatise on civic virtue. He simply returned to his farm, letting the gesture speak volumes. Contrast this with modern leaders who preempt every decision with press conferences explaining their ethics. The Stoics would call this mauvaise foi, bad faith, the gap between performed morality and lived truth. True integrity doesn't need a microphone. It hums in the spaces between what's said and what's done. Here's the litmus test. When your actions are overheard rather than announced, what story do they tell? A Stoic exercise Marcus practiced was imagining his journals being read aloud in the forum. Not the polished versions, but the raw pages where intentions met reality. Would the gap embarrass him? This isn't about perfection, it's about alignment. The carpenter doesn't boast about his level, the straightness of his shelves proves it. The gardener doesn't lecture on photosynthesis, the blooms testify. Try this today. For every value you claim to hold, identify one action that demonstrates it without narration. If you value patience, let the rushed driver merge without a performative sigh. If you champion fairness, correct the undercharge at checkout without mentioning it. These unheralded moments are where philosophy becomes flesh, because as Seneca observed, the path of virtue. Look down, you're standing on it, not in the grand speeches you'll give tomorrow, but in the quiet choices you make today. The paradox is this: the less you advertise your integrity, the more visible it becomes. Like a shadow that only appears when you stop chasing it, credibility deepens when you stop insisting it exists. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire, but his lasting legacy wasn't in edicts or proclamations. It was in the private discipline of aligning his smallest actions with his deepest convictions. No fanfare, no footnotes, just a man and his measure. That's the Stoic secret. When your life becomes the explanation, you never have to over-explain again. Think about the last time you scrolled through your phone without thinking how many posts you liked out of habit, how many half-formed replies you tapped out, how much of your attention leaked away without your conscious say. Seneca saw this coming 2,000 years before smartphones. In his letters to Lucilius, he warned of scattering your soul across too many conversations, urging his friend to guard his attention like a fortress. Today, that fortress is under siege not by barbarians, but by pings, notifications, and the endless pressure to perform our lives in real time, the Stoic antidote. Digital silence not as permanent disconnection, but as strategic withdrawal to reclaim what Seneca called the inner citadel. Imagine treating your online presence like a Stoic would treat speech, each post, comment, or reply weighed for necessity rather than reflex. Seneca's letters reveal a man who wrote with surgical precision, often waiting days before sending a response to ensure it met 3 criteria. Is it true? Is it kind? Is it necessary? Apply that filter to your next tweet or email. How much of our digital communication would survive that triage? The modern equivalent isn't logging off entirely. It's cultivating what the Stoics termed eustochia, the skill of choosing wisely where to aim your attention. Here's the experiment. For one day, practice Seneca's discipline of digital restraint. Before opening any app, ask his 3 questions. Before reacting to a controversial post, impose a 24-hour waiting period, what the Stoics called the night watch for decisions. You'll discover something startling. Most online provocations dissolve when deprived of immediate oxygen. Like a fire starved of fuel, digital drama often extinguishes itself when you refuse to fan the flames. Notice too how silence reshapes your consumption. The average person checks their phone 144 times daily, not because they need to, but because they've trained their brain to crave the dopamine hit of new input. The Stoics called this propathia, the initial involuntary reactions we must intercept before they become habits. Try this counter ritual. Each time you reach for your phone, pause to observe the impulse like a detached scientist. Name the feeling driving it: boredom, anxiety, FOMO, then wait 5 deliberate breaths. Often, the urge passes like a wave, revealing how much of our digital grazing is autopilot, not necessity. Seneca's most prescient advice: be wary of the crowd, not just bodies but minds. Today's crowd isn't just physical. It's the algorithmic mob that rewards hot takes over wisdom, outrage over nuance. When you practice digital silence, you're not just reducing noise, you're starving the attention economy of your compliance. Like a Stoic standing firm in a Roman marketplace, you become the eye of the storm, observing the chaos without being swept into it. The rewards compound quickly. Without constant input, your mind begins to reset to its natural rhythm. Thoughts deepen, observations sharpen. You'll start noticing how often online discourse follows predictable scripts: the faux outrage, the performative debates, the tribal signaling. Seneca described this as seeing through the masks, recognizing the theater behind so much human interaction. Digital silence grants you front row seats to that revelation, with the freedom to walk out when the play turns hollow. Try this sunset ritual. 1 hour before bed, enter what the Stoics called hesychia, sacred quiet. Not just screen abstinence, but a deliberate space where your mind can reassemble itself. Read Seneca's actual letters, not summaries. Journal with pen and paper. Observe how your thoughts flow differently when unmediated by keyboards and pixels. You may discover, as Marcus Aurelius did, that your best counsel comes not from endless external input, but from the wisdom that surfaces when you finally stop drowning it out. The ultimate test: after your day of digital restraint, ask which interactions truly required your voice, which notifications genuinely enriched your life. Like a Stoic returning from a wilderness retreat to the bustle of Rome, you'll re-enter the digital world with newfound discernment, not as a passive consumer of chaos, but as a selective architect of your attention. Because in an age of infinite connection, the rarest commodity isn't information. It's the silence to think about what it all means. Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher who transformed personal suffering into unshakable wisdom, left us a weapon most never learned to wield. If someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit in the outrage. That single observation flips the script on every insult, every passive-aggressive comment, every backhanded compliment. The provocation isn't the problem, it's our internal ratification of it. Picture two people walking through a market when a stranger hurls insults. One man stops to argue, his day ruined. The other keeps walking, untouched. Both heard the same words, but only one granted them power. That's the essence of Stoic non-reactivity, not suppressing emotion, but severing the chain between external stimuli and your inner peace. Modern psychology confirms this ancient insight through the concept of cognitive appraisal, the space between stimulus and response where our interpretation lives. When your coworker rolls their eyes during your presentation, the heat rising in your chest isn't inevitable. It's the result of a silent, lightning-fast story you've told yourself. They disrespect me. The Stoics trained themselves to intercept that narrative. Marcus Aurelius practiced visualizing morning encounters as if they were evening recollections, creating instant emotional distance. Soon you'll be ashes or bones, he reminded himself before meetings with difficult senators, morbid, perhaps, but effective in shrinking petty conflicts to their true size. Here's the practice. Next time someone needles you a snarky comment, an interruption, that sigh of exaggerated patience, treat it like a scientific specimen. Instead of reacting, dissect. Ask, what exact words triggered me? What meaning did I assign them? Is that meaning unshakable truth or just one possible interpretation? Epictetus trained his students to respond to insults as if hearing a foreign language, curious about the sounds, but unmoved by their content. Try translating the jab into literal terms. You're lazy becomes, their vocal cords vibrated lazy in my direction. Absurd, yes. Liberating, absolutely. History offers masterclasses in this discipline. When Cato the Younger was spat upon in the Roman Forum, he wiped his face and continued speaking as if nothing happened. His silence wasn't weakness, it was a demonstration that some acts are beneath response. Contrast this with modern outrage cycles where every microaggression sparks days of performative indignation. The Stoics would argue we're not defending honor, we're auctioning our tranquility to the lowest bidder. Non-reactivity reclaims that sovereignty. Like a tree refusing to uproot itself to prove the wind exists, you demonstrate strength through rooted calm. The real test comes in digital spaces where anonymity fuels provocation. Scroll through any comments section and you'll find armies of keyboard warriors mistaking reactivity for righteousness. The Stoic alternative, Seneca's 24-hour rule imposing a mandatory cooling-off period before engaging. Most insults lose their sting when deprived of immediate oxygen. That tweet that made your hands tremble at noon often seems laughable by dusk. This isn't about avoiding conflict. It's about choosing your battles with the precision of a general, not the reflex of a startled animal. Try this reframe. View minor irritations as strength training for your serenity. The colleague who always interrupts your personal Stoic gym. The relative who nitpicks your life choices. Your resilience coach. Each becomes an opportunity to practice what Epictetus called apatheia, not apathy, but freedom from destructive passions. Like a firefighter deliberately exposed to controlled burns, you inoculate yourself against larger conflagrations by mastering small flames. The ultimate payoff, over time, you'll notice provocations losing their gravitational pull. What once sent you spiraling now barely registers. not because you've grown numb, but because you've rewired your attention, shifting focus from what others say to what you choose to hear. As Marcus Aurelius scribbled in the darkness of his campaign tent, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." In a world addicted to reaction, your silence becomes the ultimate power move, proof that some battles are won not by fighting, but by refusing to acknowledge they exist. Seneca once wrote that life is long if you know how to use it, yet most of us fritter away years in conversations that circle without landing, explanations that spiral without clarifying, justifications that multiply without convincing. Imagine if you could reclaim those lost fragments of time, stitching them back into the fabric of your days. The Stoics weren't just philosophers of the mind, they were accountants of the soul, meticulously tracking where attention and energy flowed and where it leaked. When Seneca warned that we suffer more in imagination than in reality, he might as well have been describing the phantom debates we rehearse in our heads, the imaginary rebuttals we craft for conversations that never happen. Every minute spent over-explaining is a minute stolen from something richer, a book unread, a walk untaken, a thought unthought. Consider the math of a single day. The average person spends nearly a third of their waking hours in conversation. Now factor in the extra loops we add, rephrasing the same point, defending choices no one questioned, embellishing stories that would resonate more if left lean. Conservatively, that's 30 minutes a day lost to verbal excess. Over a year, nearly 8 full days, 8 sunrises and sunsets poured into a void. The Stoics measured life not in years but in moments actually lived. By that metric, over-explaining isn't just a habit, it's a slow hemorrhage of existence itself. Try this experiment. For 1 week, carry a small notebook or use your phone to tally every instance where you catch yourself explaining unnecessarily, repeating instructions already understood, justifying a harmless preference, elaborating when a simple yes or no would suffice. Don't judge, just record. You'll notice patterns emerging, certain triggers like authority figures or social insecurity that turn concise speech into a flood. Seneca called this the discipline of assent, the practice of pausing before words leave your lips to ask, does this serve, not is this true, or is this polite? But does this serve my purpose or my peace? The irony is this. We often over-explain to save time, to prevent misunderstandings that might require future clarification. But the Stoics revealed the hidden cost. That email you drafted 3 times to ensure no one could possibly take offense. The meeting where you reiterated your point in 4 different ways. Those weren't efficiencies, they were premature surrenders. Like overpacking for a trip just to avoid deciding what you'll actually need, verbal clutter weighs you down without adding value. Marcus Aurelius practiced writing his letters in plain ink without revisions, trusting that clarity required fewer words, not more. His rule: if a thought couldn't stand on its first expression, polishing wouldn't save it. Here's where modern tools meet ancient wisdom. Use technology to audit your speech. Record a day's worth of conversations with consent and listen back. Note the redundancies, the qualifiers, the defensive preambles. Then apply Seneca's razor. Trim every sentence to its vital essence. You'll find most ideas survive and even thrive with less scaffolding. The French mathematician Blaise Pascal once apologized for a long letter, saying, "I didn't have time to write a short one." The Stoics would have nodded brevity isn't laziness, it's labor distilled. The reward isn't just reclaimed minutes, it's the quiet triumph of discovering how much you've been saying that never needed to be said. Like a gardener pruning dead branches to reveal the shape of the tree, each unnecessary word you remove exposes the contours of your true intent. Seneca's letters to Lucilius weren't short because he had little to share. They were brief because he respected his friend's time and his own. In an age drowning in noise, that's the ultimate rebellion, to speak sparingly, and in doing so, to live more. Marcus Aurelius kept a journal that would one day become one of history's most intimate philosophical works, yet he never intended anyone to read it. Those private pages, now known as meditations, weren't crafted for an audience. They were written in the quiet hours before dawn, raw and unfiltered, as if the emperor were whispering to his soul. This reveals a profound Stoic paradox. Transparency has its time and place, but not every thought deserves an audience. The same man who governed an empire with calculated openness also understood that some truths are too fragile, too sacred, to be shared indiscriminately. Imagine standing before a vault containing your most private convictions, the fears that keep you awake, the dreams you barely admit to yourself, the quiet disappointments that shape your worldview. The Stoic doesn't fling those doors open to every passerby. They guard them with the discernment of a curator, knowing not every piece of the soul is meant for exhibition. Modern culture often conflates authenticity with total disclosure, as if withholding any part of oneself were a kind of deception. But the Stoics drew a critical distinction between honesty and compulsion. When Marcus wrote, "The things you think about determine the quality of your mind," he wasn't just advocating positive thinking, he was highlighting the vulnerability of our inner world. Every thought spoken aloud becomes subject to interpretation, debate, or worse, indifference. Consider the colleague who shares half-formed career doubts in a team meeting, only to find them repackaged as performance concerns in their next review. Or the friend who confesses a marital struggle to an acquaintance, only to watch it morph into neighborhood gossip. These aren't failures of honesty, they're breaches of discernment. The Stoics called this prosouch vigilance over what crosses the threshold of your lips. Discernment isn't secrecy. It's recognizing that some truths are like seeds. They need darkness to take root before they're ready for light. Seneca advised his friend Lucilius to share your wisdom, but not your worries, drawing a line between mentorship and emotional dumping. Think of a surgeon who doesn't narrate every moment of self-doubt mid-operation, or a parent who shields children from financial anxieties while still teaching fiscal responsibility. This selective transparency isn't deceitful. It's protective of your values, your relationships, and your own clarity. When Marcus cautioned, "You don't have to turn this into something," he was warning against the alchemy by which private struggles become public performances. The test is simple. Before speaking, ask not just, "Is this true?" but, "Does this serve?" A grievance aired impulsively might relieve momentary tension but erode long-term trust. A dream shared too soon might invite skepticism rather than support. The Stoics practiced what psychologists now call emotional granularity, the art of identifying precisely which feelings warrant expression and to whom. Picture two friends facing the same setback. One broadcasts their frustration in real time, turning every minor obstacle into a social media lament. The other processes privately, then shares insights once the storm has passed. Both are authentic, but only one understands that not all transparency is created equal. History offers a masterclass in this balance. When George Washington's officers urged him to seize power after the Revolutionary War, he didn't confess his temptations in real time. He waited, reflected, then delivered his famous resignation speech, a moment of calculated transparency that shaped a nation. Contrast this with modern leaders who mistake oversharing for connection, diluting their authority with unfiltered outbursts. The Stoics would argue that restraint isn't repression. It's the space where private conviction matures into public wisdom. Try this exercise for 1 week. Categorize your thoughts before speaking. Label them: seeds, ideas needing time to grow; swords, truths that must be spoken now; or stones' burdens better carried in silence. You'll start noticing how often we mistake stones for swords, how readily we share what might actually flourish in the dark. Marcus Aurelius didn't guard his journal out of shame. He protected it out of respect for the sanctity of his own becoming. In a world that prizes constant disclosure, your selective silence isn't a wall. It's the greenhouse where your deepest values take root before they're ready to bear fruit. There's an unspoken pressure in modern life to perform omniscience, to have instant answers, polished opinions, and airtight explanations for everything. But the Stoics saw something revolutionary in the simple admission of "I don't know." Epictetus, the philosopher who turned his enslavement into a masterclass on inner freedom, put it bluntly: it is impossible to learn what you think you already understand. That's the paradox. Our fear of appearing ignorant often locks us into actual ignorance. Think of the last time you nodded along to a concept you didn't grasp, or fabricated an answer when put on the spot. That momentary save didn't protect your credibility, it eroded it, because true confidence isn't masked by bravado, it's revealed in the quiet humility to acknowledge limits. History's most respected thinkers shared this trait. Socrates built an entire philosophy on the foundation of "I know that I know nothing." The Stoics took this further, recognizing that admitting uncertainty isn't just intellectually honest, it's strategically wise. When Marcus Aurelius faced complex decisions as emperor, he surrounded himself with experts unafraid to say, "I'm not sure." Their restraint gave him something far more valuable than false certainty: the space to weigh options carefully. Contrast this with modern workplaces where bluffing through gaps in knowledge has become an unspoken norm. The executive who claims expertise in every meeting isn't inspiring confidence, they're broadcasting fragility, a silent fear that any unanswered question might unmask them. Epictetus offered a liberating alternative. If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish. That's the key. The moment you stop performing knowledge and start pursuing it, something shifts. People stop evaluating your performance and start trusting your process. Imagine a doctor who says, "This symptom is outside my experience, let me consult a colleague." That admission doesn't weaken their authority, it reinforces it. The Stoics called this sophrosyne the wisdom of knowing what you don't know. It's not passive resignation, it's active discernment. Like a map that clearly marks uncharted territories, it prevents you from wandering blindly into terrain you're unprepared to navigate. Consider how often we confuse leadership with infallibility. We expect teachers to have every answer, managers to predict every outcome, parents to solve every problem. But the most transformative mentors are often those who say, "Let's figure this out together." Seneca modeled this in his letters, frequently admitting gaps in his understanding before offering tentative insights. That humility didn't diminish his wisdom, it made his conclusions more credible. Modern research confirms this. Studies on expert credibility show that occasional admissions of uncertainty increase trust more than unwavering confidence. The audience intuitively recognizes that someone comfortable saying, "I don't know," has no need to lie. Here's the practice. Next time you're tempted to bluff, pause. Try Epictetus's three-part response. "I don't know yet. Here's what I do understand. Here's how I'll learn more." That framework transforms ignorance from vulnerability to opportunity. Watch how conversations shift when you replace defensive certainty with curious collaboration. The co-worker who asked a gotcha question suddenly becomes a thought partner. The family debate about politics morphs into shared exploration. Even in parenting, "I'm not sure," let's research that models lifelong learning better than any fabricated answer. The Stoics took this further with premeditation ignorantiae, the premeditation of ignorance. Before entering any discussion, they'd mentally rehearse saying, "I don't know" with the same ease as stating facts. This wasn't false modesty, it was emotional inoculation against the fear of exposure. Because when you've already visualized admitting limits, the act itself loses its sting. Like a warrior training with weighted armor, you prepare for difficulty so reality feels lighter. There's a quiet power in this approach that transcends ancient philosophy. Modern innovators from science to entrepreneurship thrive not by having all answers, but by asking better questions. The CEO who admits blind spots during investor meetings often garners more support than the one peddling overconfidence. The scientist who publishes negative results advances the field as much as the one announcing breakthroughs. Even in personal relationships, "I don't know why I reacted that way, help me understand," builds deeper connections than any rehearsed apology. Epictetus left us a final clue. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak. In a world that rewards performative certainty, the real differentiator isn't having more answers, it's having the courage to sit with unanswered questions. Because the admission of "I don't know" isn't an endpoint, it's the threshold of every true discovery. Before the sun crests the horizon, before the first conversation begins, there's a sacred window the Stoics guarded fiercely, those silent morning hours when the mind is uncluttered by the world's demands. Seneca, who shaped Stoicism into a practical discipline, began each day in deliberate quiet, not with grand meditations, but with what he called the gentle inspection of the soul. Picture him in his villa's garden, wrapped in a simple cloak, observing the dawn light as if it were a mirror for his thoughts. No journals, no speeches, no rehearsing the day's debates, just presence. This wasn't passivity, it was the mental equivalent of sharpening a blade before battle. Modern neuroscience now confirms what Seneca intuited. The first 90 minutes after waking determine cognitive tone for the entire day. When we reach for phones, blast news, or dive straight into conversation, we're essentially dumping adrenaline into a system still calibrating, the Stoic alternative. A ritual of silentium matutinum, morning silence, where you become the observer before becoming the participant. Start with 5 minutes upon waking. Not guided meditation, not goal setting, but pure sensory awareness. Feel the weight of the blanket, hear the distant birdsong, notice the rhythm of your breath without altering it. Seneca described this as letting the soul settle like water in a still pool, allowing clarity to rise naturally from the depths. The key lies in resisting verbalization. Most morning routines fail because they replace external noise with internal chatter. Gratitude lists become rote recitations, affirmations turn into anxious repetitions. True Stoic silence means delaying all language, even mental narration. When a thought arises, "I need to prep for that meeting," imagine placing it on a leaf floating down a stream. No judgment, no engagement. This trains what Marcus Aurelius called the discipline of assent, the ability to choose which thoughts deserve your energy. Practical steps: leave your phone charging in another room. Brew tea slowly, focusing on the steam's curl rather than your to-do list. Sit by a window and watch light shift across surfaces. These aren't just calming activities, they're recalibrations. Seneca often wrote letters in this state, finding that ideas flowed with greater precision when preceded by wordless awareness. Compare this to our modern reflex of grabbing devices mid-yawn, letting algorithms set our mental weather before we've even rubbed the sleep from our eyes. The transformation comes subtly. Days begun in silence carry a different quality, less reactive, more intentional. A traffic jam becomes neutral rather than infuriating. A colleague's thoughtless remark slips by like a breeze. Why? Because you've anchored yourself in what the Stoics termed proherses, the core faculty of choice before the world could scatter your focus. Like a warrior oiling his armor before combat, this quiet preparation makes everything that follows smoother, more resilient. For those who protest they don't have time, Seneca offered a razor-sharp rebuttal in his letters. You're not lacking time, you're lacking priorities. The morning silence ritual needn't be lengthy. Even 6 minutes requires nervous system responses. The billionaire CEO waking at dawn to crush emails isn't winning. The single parent savoring silent coffee while the household sleeps is. It's not about duration but depth, the deliberate cultivation of what Epictetus called the inner citadel before the day's sieges begin. End your silence not with a plan but with a question. What quality do I want to embody today? Not tasks to accomplish but virtues to express. Seneca would often choose one: patience, courage, equanimity, and carry it like a coin in his pocket, mentally fingering it throughout the day. The answers that emerge in stillness have a way of echoing when the chaos rises, because mornings begun in silence don't just change how you think, they change what you notice, what you value, and ultimately, who you become. Cato the Younger once stood trial before Rome's Senate, accused of treason by political enemies hungry for his humiliation. As witnesses hurled false accusations, he didn't interrupt, didn't rebut, just sat carving notes into a wax tablet. When the prosecutor demanded to know if he was even listening, Cato looked up and said, "I'm noting how rare it is to hear a man speak who doesn't know when to stop." That moment crystallizes Stoic silence at its most potent, not as weakness, but as a blade honed by restraint. Today, we drown in a world where every thought is monetized into content, every grievance amplified for engagement, every personal brand shouting to be heard above the algorithm. The contrast couldn't be starker. Where ancient leaders let actions resonate, modern influencers mistake volume for value. Consider the trajectory of two reputations. Marcus Aurelius ruled the known world without press conferences or manifestos. His wisdom whispered in private journals never meant for publication. 2 millennia later, we dissect those pages like sacred texts. Now imagine a world where he'd live-streamed his meditations, turned stoicism into self-help clickbait, diluted his insights with daily hot takes. Would his legacy hold the same weight? There's a reason we remember Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, 272 words delivered in under 3 minutes, more vividly than any politician's hour-long stump speech. Lasting impact doesn't come from frequency, it comes from density, the compression of truth into moments so deliberate they withstand time's erosion. The Industrial Revolution of attention has inverted this equation. Social media rewards the constant over the considered, the reactive over the reflective. We've created economies where oversharing is currency, where silence reads as disengagement rather than depth. But history's ledger tells a different story. When Gandhi fell silent for entire days during India's independence struggle, the British government grew more unsettled than when he spoke. When composer Arvo Pärt took an 8-year hiatus from creating music, his eventual return produced works of such distilled purity they redefined sacred minimalism. These weren't absences, they were incubations. Here's the litmus test for our digital age. Imagine your online presence vanished tomorrow. Would your cumulative words leave an imprint or just echoes? The Stoics measured influence not in followers, but in the silent ripple of example. Consider how differently we remember two figures from America's founding era: Thomas Paine, who published prolifically but died nearly forgotten, and George Washington, whose reserve became the blueprint for presidential dignity. Both shaped a nation, but one's presence outlasted his lifespan while the other's words grew fainter with each reprinting. This isn't about shunning communication, but calibrating it. The Japanese concept of negative space teaches that what's omitted defines what remains. A sculptor doesn't judge their work by the marble removed, but by the form revealed through subtraction. Apply that to personal legacy. Your most enduring impression won't be the sum of all you said, but the pattern revealed in what you chose not to say. When Michelangelo was asked how he carved David, he reportedly answered, "I just removed everything that wasn't David." Stoic silence operates on the same principle, chipping away the excess to reveal the unshakable core beneath. The modern temptation is to mistake visibility for virtue, to believe that unless our values are performative, they don't count. But the quietest figures often cast the longest shadows. Rosa Parks didn't give a speech when she refused to move. Her silence on that bus spoke volumes no oration could match. J.D. Salinger's decades of reclusion only deepened the cultural resonance of The Catcher in the Rye. Even in nature, the deepest roots grow in darkness. There's power in letting some truths go unspoken until the world is ready to hear them. So here's the challenge for 1 week. Audit your contributions not by quantity, but by necessity. Before speaking or posting, ask Cotto's question, does this need to be said and need to be said by me? The gaps you leave won't be vacancies, they'll be the spaces where others can finally hear you think. Because in the end, we're remembered not for how often we broke the silence, but for how our silence spoke when we chose to break it. The Stoics didn't preach silence as a retreat from the world, but as a way to reclaim something far more precious, your intrinsic worth. Think of every unnecessary word you've ever spoken as a tiny withdrawal from your emotional reserves, each over-explanation chipping away at the foundation of your confidence. Marcus Aurelius put it plainly, you don't have to turn this into something, you don't have to react, you don't have to explain. That's the heart of it, recognizing that your value isn't held in other people's understanding, but in the quiet certainty of your own convictions. Seneca took it further, comparing verbal excess to a leaky vessel. The more you pour out, the less you have left for what truly matters. Speech is the mirror of the soul, he wrote, but silence is its sanctuary. Consider how often we use words as currency, bargaining for approval or scrambling to control perceptions. The Stoic alternative: let your actions resonate louder than your justifications. When Epictetus taught, if you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish, he wasn't advocating indifference, he was offering liberation. The moment you stop needing external validation, you reclaim the power you've been giving away with every unnecessary syllable. History's most enduring figures understood this alchemy. George Washington's famous restraint in speech wasn't just a personality quirk, it was a strategic choice that amplified his authority. The fewer words he spoke, the more weight each one carried. Contrast that with modern leaders who mistake volume for influence, drowning their message in a sea of qualifiers and caveats. The Stoic model reveals a paradox: the less you say, the more people listen. Not because you've become mysterious, but because you've demonstrated something rare, a self-possession that doesn't require an audience. Here's your challenge for 1 full day: practice intentional silence, not muteness but precision. Before speaking, ask Epictetus's 3 questions. Is this true? Is this necessary? Is this kind? Watch what happens. Notice how your energy shifts when you're not expending it on verbal clutter. Observe how others respond when your words arrive sparingly, like carefully chosen gifts rather than scattered confetti. Most revealing of all, pay attention to what surfaces in the spaces between speech. The thoughts you've been drowning out with noise, the intuitions you've been overriding with explanations. Marcus Aurelius left us a final clue in his Meditations. The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. Silence is the wash that lets your true colors emerge. So try it. Let a day of measured speech reveal what's been hidden beneath the chatter. Then ask yourself, did the world misunderstand you more, or did you finally hear yourself clearer? If you accept the challenge, share what you discover. How did silence reshape your interactions? What did you notice about your own habits? The Stoics believed wisdom grows in community, and your experience might just light the way for someone else. Because in the end, this isn't about saying less, it's about meaning more. And that's a lesson no amount of words can fully